beheaded frogs, or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us cussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes. Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I am here live out of studio with For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about them in the ways that they're good for you, your health, your wealth, your happiness, the health and wealth and happiness of your friends and your families and your pets and your garden plants and pretty much everything all around you, because we're all here on one spot in the universe, one little tiny dot called planet Earth. And we're happy to be here with you today, and we got a jam-packed show. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff, but you can join us at any time to talk about any environmental topic. You can call it 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007. We'll put you right on the air. And you can text also at any time at 419-973-5841. I know that the current generation, has genetic difficulties talking on telephones and prefers the texting, and so we're all set for you. Young folks, just give us a text at 419-973-5841, and we'll read it on the air. Speaking of being on the air, last week we were on the air, and I have to do a correction this week, a slightly embarrassing correction. I was talking about the process of ecological succession, and for some reason I thought I was pronouncing it correctly, but when I listened to the recordings to do the podcast and YouTube video, the whole show I said succession, which I'm not even sure that's a word, succession. It's pronounced succession, and I guess the mnemonic is succession doesn't suck in ecology. But if you try to take some of the knowledge you gained last week and talk to a bunch of ecologists and start talking about secession, there you're going to get some giggles and stuff. So just a quick update there. So today is 9/12/2021, which means that yesterday, of course, as everyone knows, was 9/11/2020, marking 20 years since the 9/11 disaster. And I'm not going to talk a lot about that. It was talked about quite a bit, but the folks who heard our Columbus show yesterday know that I think it's important for us all to realize and to point out that there was an ecological disaster that came along with the human disaster and the economic disaster and all the other sorts of disasters that 9/11 was. And that is that as the Twin Towers were burning in that week after the attacks, they were giving off all this smoke. And the EPA at the time said the smoke wasn't hazardous. And so a whole bunch of first responders went into the burning area in a futile attempt to find survivors. We should have known there weren't going to be any survivors, but the really terrible, the criminal thing is that smoke was not harmless. That smoke was full of toxic chemicals and toxic particulates, most noticeably asbestos, because the girders of the Twin Towers had been sprayed with asbestos, which was not enough to save them from the flames, or not enough to protect the towers. But all that asbestos got put up into the air in those clouds. And there's documented about 800 people died of the respiratory diseases and other diseases they got from being exposed to the toxins of 9/11. And, we remember the 3,000 who died in the attack itself, but I think we also need to remember the 600 that died after that, because they were really heroic people. And the EPA knew at the time that smoke was toxic, but they got hijacked for political and propaganda reasons. They couldn't afford to say, oh, this is really highly toxic smoke, you need to stay away from it. And it's just a reminder, and as a result, 600 more people died. So it's just a reminder that when agencies like the EPA start getting political and start turning away from just reporting the truth as they're supposed to do, there's real sacrifices, there's real costs to that. So, and we can't allow our agencies that are designed to protect the public health fall into the trap of politicizing and propagandizing and not doing their main job. So my main job, of course, every week is to bring you an hour of ecological news and information. And on Sunday mornings, I like to go outside and look to my local nature for some inspiration for this first 15 minutes. So let me lay out the show for you here. We have 15 minutes where we're just going to chat. And this is the time I'd really like somebody to call in or text in. And then we're going to hear an interview. We have a nice interview lined up with Adrien Lowien, who is with the Wood County Park District. And she's going to be talking to us about setting fire to stuff. Because that's part of her job in the Wood County Park District, is to set controlled fires to clear out the forest. Then we'll hear from our wonderful advertisers and patrons. And then Rebecca Wood will be joining us. She'll be calling in and talking about the St. Lawrence River, which is ecologically a very important river. Then we got a ton of ecological news to get through. But of course, anytime we would make time for you. And speaking of which, I just got a text. Someone told me they were unable to hear the show through the station stream today. I don't know if that could be checked. Josh, perhaps you could check and see if that's true or not. It could just be, often that's just somebody having problems with their own personal computer. But we do appreciate the text, so and I'll get Josh right on that there. Okay, so now, stuff I wanted to chat about in this first 15 minutes of the show. One, as I said, I like to go every day, and I got to walk the dog in the morning before the show. Of course, the dog doesn't care there's a show on. Got to walk him anyway. Those of you who are dog owners understand this. But so we were walking out there on the Slippery Elm Trail here in Bowling Green, and I'm always looking for inspiration as I'm walking along. And it was there wasn't much going on. I didn't see any deer this time. I didn't even see any squirrels on the trail. But I could hear crickets, tree crickets. You know, they're in the pre-dawn light. They do a very high-pitched kind of whiny sort of, but pretty, and relaxing sort of background sound. It's the kind of pervasive background sound in nature that you just sort of say, oh, yep, there's crickets, and you kind of tune it out and go on. But for most of the walk, that's all I heard or saw were these tree crickets going. And then just at the very end, just as I was about to get off the trail, a great blue heron flew over Ursula. That's my dog's name is Ursula. Great blue heron flew over Ursula and me, coming swooping down low over the trail. And that's a really beautiful, majestic bird, really big, huge wingspan. And, it just struck me as an ecologist, you make the connections between the great blue heron flying overhead and the tree crickets that you're hearing, because great blue heron's primary diet is fish, although they do eat rodents and some insects. But those fish in the streams that the great blue heron is probably on its way to go fishing, they eat things like the tree crickets that you could hear. So literally, when you look at it in terms of like biomass, I mean, tree cricket biomass gets changed into fish biomass because the crickets fall in the streams or whatever, and the fish eat them. And then that fish biomass is what makes up the great blue heron biomass. So we're really literally all connected in just one big, huge ecosystem. And this was this also made me think about a movie that I watched last night. This was a movie that came out a while ago. It was called Interstellar. And watching Interstellar, I have to say, as an ecologist, I hated it because they they had the Earth dying. So many science fiction movies start out with the Earth dying, and they just said, "Oh, there's a blight." They didn't, specify what the blight was, but supposedly this was some sort of organism that metabolized nitrogen and sucked oxygen out of the air while it was doing that, but it had to grow on plants, and it only grew on one species of plant at a time. In other words, it's the most improbable, impossible sort of organism you could come up with in a movie. But part of the reason I hated this movie wasn't just those sorts of inaccuracies, because it's a science fiction movie. Hey, you're going to have those things. But a lot of it, reason I didn't like it, is this attitude that is in so many sci-fi movies that the Earth doesn't want us. It doesn't want human beings. The idea that somehow we, human beings, are separate from the Earth, and the Earth's trying to get rid of us. And, the height of that is the Will Smith movie, After Earth, that came out in 2013, where literally every animal on Earth had evolved to hate and attack humans. And they had chased us off the planet, theoretically. And, it's all part of this idea that humans are meant for the stars, and we need to get off the Earth and go out into space. And believe it or not, I also believe that. I mean, Carl Sagan was a great proponent of that, and it makes a lot of sense that you have populations of humans all over the solar system, and even to other star systems if possible. But this idea that we have to destroy the Earth first, that somehow we have to make the Earth uninhabitable because that's going to force us to move out into the stars, that is so wrong on many levels. I mean, so many levels. One very basic level is if you don't have a home base, if you don't have a functioning planet behind you, and you literally have to live off the resources in outer space, you're not going to make it, because outer space actually is actively hostile to humans. Outer space really doesn't want humans. If you go out into outer space unprotected, you'll die instantly. And so this idea that's in so many sci-fi movies, and it's even in the one book I really loved, series of books, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which one of my favorite series, but they destroy the Earth at the beginning, and it's like just used as a dramatic effect to make what the hero's doing seem all that more vital and important. And I think that kind of sucks. I believe humans have to reproduce and get out into the universe and into the solar system. But the question is, are we going to reproduce kind of the way water fleas do? Which the way water fleas reproduce is the mother flea gets a whole bunch of little fleas in her belly developing, and then at some point she explodes and the next population swims out into the water, but she sacrifices herself in the process. The Earth doesn't have to do that. We don't have to destroy the Earth in order to colonize space. We can have both. And in fact, I think we absolutely must have both, because if we don't keep the Earth a functioning ecosystem, we won't have the necessary society to put people up into space. And so, on that note, part of a functioning ecosystem is a planet that has fire, because fire has been there all along, right alongside life from the very beginning. The Native Americans knew that one of the keys to having a sustainable ecosystem is managing fire, is to have fires that you can control, fires that help improve the ecology. And we have started doing that in our society. For a long time, all fire was bad. And you had to stomp out every single fire. But finally, we have now incorporated some of that wisdom of the native cultures and are using fire to manage the lands that we have. And so that's why I wanted to have Adrien Lowien from the Wood County Park District on to talk about that. So, Josh, if you got that queued up, I think we can go to it. Whenever you're welcome to For a Green Future. Could you please tell us your name and your position?
Yeah, my name is Adrien Lowien, and I am the woodland specialist at the Wood County Park District.
All right, cool. Well, we we love woodlands here on For a Green Future because they're definitely part of the green future.
Yes.
We're talking today about controlled burns, and could you tell us what exactly is a controlled burn and how are they done?
So a controlled burn, another term that we use for that is prescribed fire. And what that is, it's a fire that's done for ecological purposes, and it's done in a manner so that we're controlling what the fire does. And we're making it do what we want it to, and we're using it as a tool, just as we would use mowers or anything else. We're using the fire as a tool.
And so when do you apply this tool? How do you know when to do it, and how exactly do you apply it?
So we do it usually in the spring and in the falls. We do it when the materials that we're wanting to burn are going to be dry enough to burn. And we're also looking at other factors as far as weather and humidity and things like that to make sure that they're not going to be too dry, that the winds are right, and all of that stuff. So spring and fall, usually the seasons we usually do it, the ODNR actually has open burning bans because stuff is dry and stuff can catch fire easily. So we have to get a special permit through them so that we can do it.
I see.
Trying to think what else.
Well, so physically, what have you got? You have a pot that has flammable liquid in it. How do you physically set these fires?
So we use an ignition method using a combination of gasoline and diesel. We call it burn fuel, and we have it's called a drip torch, and it's a metal canister that has a wick at the end of it, and as the fuel comes out of it, it ignites, and that gets dripped on the edges of our burn unit. And it's just little bitty drops. It sounds like it might be this crazy thing, but it's actually not that intense. And so we'll light the edges, and then it'll burn into a unit. We'll clear the edges. We'll make these what we call burn breaks around the units that we are burning. And those breaks they're wide enough that they're going to be wider, about twice the length of any flame that'd be near it, so nothing can go over it. They're cleared of any flammable material so that we're containing that fire into a small unit. So we'll light the edges. We'll kind of start going against the wind, and we'll light, and that way the fire will burn real slow, kind of a back and fire against the wind. And then when we get to the opposite side where the wind direction is going to be stronger, it's going to be blowing into an area that's already been burned, so it gives us really good control of the fire.
Oh, I see. Well, that's cool. So what are the ecological benefits of doing this, of having these burns?
So there's a few different reasons that we do it ecologically. One real common one is for our prairie and grassland fires. It's a really good tool for minimizing any woody encroachment in those areas. So kind of keeping the invasive shrubs out, keeping out, a lot of woodies and trees and stuff, so that we're maintaining those as prairies. And that helps us work in our arsenal of tools of doing that. If we can use fire, we can mow less, so we're not running the mowers as much, we're not causing as much debris in the area, because we're also burning up any of the woody debris and organic matter, so that's getting immediately recycled into the ground and into the ecosystem rather than laying there. We can use fewer herbicides and stuff because we're taking care of it with the fire rather than with chemicals. It's really useful in maintaining oak woodlands and oak savannas, because oaks are fire tolerant, so we can go through there with fire, and the oaks persist really well through that, and some of the other species which we want to mitigate don't do as well. So it's a really useful tool as far as our oak areas. It reduces fuel load, so if we have areas that we're having down branches and leaves and stuff like that, if we get fire through there, we can reduce that fuel load. So if something like a naturally occurring wildfire or something, or sometimes we get these areas where people, throw out a cigarette or something happens, we're reducing that fuel load so it's safer for fire to continue in the future. And it also does, things like it increases biodiversity, some native plants that aren't as common. It can help with the seed germination of certain specific seeds. Just kind of a variety of things, but kind of the, I don't know which one's more important than the other.
Well, they all sound pretty cool. And you already kind of covered this, but some years back there was a famous wildfire that was set in Yellowstone that got out of control. So are there any other measures you folks take to make sure that these fires stay controlled?
Yeah, so like I said, we do the burn breaks. That's the main thing, planning our ignition. We're also, only burning under very specific situations as far as the weather, as far as staffing. So, we have lots of extra water, and we do more prep and backup planning than we do actually burning, I think. So the whole thing is a lot of planning and a lot of backup planning. And, 99% of the time, the backup planning never gets used. I'll have, a ton of water on site that doesn't even get used because we end up not needing it. But if we did, it's there. We work really close with our park police department to have a couple of those officers on site to kind of help, watch the area. We communicate a lot with our local fire department. So anywhere where I'm planning a burn or going to do one, I'm communicating with the fire chief and that jurisdiction, and they know what we're doing. So if we need their help, if something were to happen, they know to expect that. I can call them if I need to. I haven't ever had to do that, but if I did, they would be there to help. And another thing to keep in mind too, comparing this to Yellowstone, is we don't have that vast majority of wild space. We have roads, and that fire's not going to carry over the roads. So worst case scenario, if we did have something that got onto a unit we didn't want it to, or something like that, it's only going to go as far as the next road. It's not going to go for miles and miles, because we don't have that chunk of wild space that would be flammable enough to kind of catch a wildfire in this part of Ohio.
Well, that's reassuring. So now Wood County has somewhere around 20 parks. Are all of them candidates for these burns, or are there places that you wouldn't burn?
Right. So we're looking at specific habitats to burn. So if those habitats aren't in place, we wouldn't do a burn there. We do our burns on our more of our preserve type of properties rather than our parks that have more facilities and stuff like that. And another thing, some of our parks are located in a proximity where we wouldn't want to burn. Like WW Night is really close to a few different highways, and we wouldn't want to risk putting smoke over busy highways or anything like that. So we probably would never burn there because of that. So proximity to highly, densely populated areas, we're not going to burn. If we have a property that's really close to a highway or a hospital or an airport, we wouldn't burn there. So this coming fall, I have plans to possibly burn at 3 of our locations, and all of those are quite rural and have high quality habitat that we want to maintain.
Okay, so if somebody from the public happens to be going to one of those places when you're doing a burn, what should they look out for?
So we'll close off the area that we're going to be burned. We'll close, if we have a road going into there, we'll kind of close that off. Any trails that would be going through the area, we'll close those off. roadways, public roadways that are adjacent to the property, we'll put up smoke signage, and we always plan to work with the wind so that we're not putting heavy smoke across major roadways. So the main issue would be watching out for smoke and then following any closure signs that are posted. Looking at a burn, we're not going to close something for the whole day usually. It's just going to be for a few hours, and just, respecting those closure signs, understanding they're temporary. We're in there doing a job. We want to do everything to keep the public safe that we can. So just respecting those and knowing, if you come back, maybe this evening, especially in our prairie burns, those wrap up pretty quickly. If we're doing a woodland, we're kind of in there longer, making sure some of those bigger pieces are extinguished completely. But it's not a long-term thing. So just be patient, wait for us to open it back up. Don't try to be brave and walk through there. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
All right. Well, that sounds like good advice. Those are signs you should obey, definitely. So it sounds like doing these fires is a lot of work. But I have to ask: is it fun? Do you enjoy setting these fires?
As the prescribed fire manager, it's fun, but it's also a little stressful because I want to make sure everything goes according to plan, and we're playing with fire. So even though we have controls, we have plans, we have trained staff, there's always the chance that something might change and things might not go as planned. So having that in my head, it's always a little stressful, but it is also fun. It's definitely, not like a party or a bonfire where we're just out there, lighting stuff on fire. We're taking it seriously, and we're wanting to do it as safely and as controlled as possible. I'm not going to say that I don't enjoy it, because I do. It's a really useful tool and it is exciting, but it's also something that we take seriously. Okay.
Well, that's pretty much all I had to ask you. Is there anything you'd like to add?
We just, I just want to say we all, at the Park District, we all really care about what we do, and we're also really thankful for the residents of Wood County for being able to do all the work ecologically and with our programs and stuff that we can. So, just a thank you to everybody for us being able to do what we do, keep the parks the way they are.
Okay, and that was our interview, and I have to say, full disclosure, of course, the Wood County Park District is one of our advertisers, but that's not why we had them on. We had them on because of their expertise in this area. Although it is time to talk about our advertisers and patrons. For Green Future is brought to you by the Wood County Park District. And the Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats, and they lead outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy, from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. And there's several ways to get a hold of them. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. That's 419-353-1897. Also, you can go to their website, which is wcparks.org. And, of course, they are available on many social platforms, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all those things. You just search for WC Parks. And you also search if you want to download their app to your cell phone or your computer. And you go to any app store and search for WC Parks. It's a free app, and it'll have pictures of things going on in the parks, and it'll have announcements of things that are scheduled. And so that's the Wood County Park District. And For Green Future is also brought to you by our patrons, and these are wonderful, fantastic, far-sighted people who realized that we need to somehow actually support getting this sort of information out. And they went to patreon.com, searched for Green Future, our pages popped up, our Patreon pages popped up, and they picked one, chose a monthly rate at which a little bit of money comes out of their checking account, comes over to us. And, if you're like most people, you got several things on there that are taking monthly things out of your bank account that you're not really getting any benefit from. I mean, I have a couple streaming services that I haven't used in like a year. And so instead of just wasting money, why don't you put a little bit into Foregreen Future, which, every week is going to provide you with, and provide the whole area with information about ecology and the environment. All right. So there's our advertisers and patrons. And Josh, I have two questions for you. One is I'm getting an echo in my headphones. It's kind of distracting. And two, has Rebecca called in yet? Rebecca was supposed to call in right now. Is she on the line?
I'm here.
Okay, Rebecca. Hey, and I could hear you and talk to you this time.
Okay, I can't hear you very well, so that's bad. I turned off my thing where the conference, so I think that maybe will take care of the echo.
Okay. Yep, I do not hear. Oh, no, I hear myself echoing still. I don't hear you echoing. But anyway,
okay.
Go ahead, Rebecca. Let's hear what you have to say.
Okay, well, I decided to do the St. Lawrence River this week because my roommate and I are taking this online class about Native Americans in Canada. Actually, they're First Nations. That's what they are. First Nations peoples in Canada, history, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, the St. Lawrence River came up in reference to fur trading, but also in Muskegon, Michigan, where my grandparents lived, and whenever we go up to visit in the summer, we usually come when the Seaway Festival was going on, which is like Muskegon's equivalent of the county fair, basically. And that had to do with the St. Lawrence Seaway, which I guess is what you call the whole trading route, which, still continues today and goes back 9,000 years, apparently, involving the St. Lawrence River. And then, it separates Canada from the U.S., it runs through Vermont and New York. And when we did, I spent part of my childhood living in Plattsburgh. So we went up to Montreal, across the St. Lawrence River, among other things. We used to Lake Champlain, where we was close to where we lived. So you could, look across, you'd be in the lake and looking across and seeing Vermont. So it reminded me a lot of things. Yeah, the St. Lawrence River is of course super important ecologically, economically, and any number of other ways because it connects the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. In fact, originally, it was part of this really large, still kind of is part of a big trading route that went from the Atlantic Ocean. You could take your little canoe up the St. Lawrence River, and then down the Maumee, where Toledo is, you can take it, and there's a little portage at some point, and then you connect to the Ohio, Mississippi, bing, bam, boom, you're in the Gulf of you're in the Gulf, down by New Orleans. So it's always been very important. It's the primary drainage outflow of the Great Lakes, and an international boundary between U.S. and Canada. On the north, you got Quebec and Ontario, Vermont and New York on the south side. And the basis for the St. Lawrence Seaway, which is named after St. Lawrence of Rome, a 3rd century Christian martyr. Its source is in Lake Ontario, but I guess the headwaters go all the way up into Minnesota somewhere. So basically, depending on how you measure, it starts out in Kingston, Ontario, and comes out at / Cape Vincent, New York, on the other side of the river, and it has its mouth in the Gulf of St. Lawrence in Quebec. 310 miles long river, drains 519 square miles. Actually formed when something called the Champlain Sea was being drained. So this was a giant inlet of the Atlantic Ocean that existed because of the glaciers, basically glaciers. And this was 10,000 years ago. It was formed, I think, it was formed 13,000 years ago and was still draining 10,000 years ago. In fact, it's really still shrinking. What we've got, the St. Lawrence River and Bay is really a remnant of the Champlain Sea, and it's still shrinking. So that process is ongoing, which is kind of cool. Yeah, the Champlain Sea would have covered parts of Quebec, Ontario, New York, and Vermont, those places again. And the Gulf of St. Lawrence is still the largest estuary in the world. I did not know that. So the river goes tidal starting out at Quebec City. It's located apparently on a rift, which got me into this whole rabbit hole about rifts and faults. Know the difference? I still don't. It would seem like a rift is something that happens when it's pulling apart, when the continental crusts are pulling apart. But then a rift valley is any sunken earth around a fault, including like a fault that is not a rift. So that's confusing. So, but it has like 4 major archipelagos of islands and goes through 3 lakes. You know, the St. Lawrence Lake, and then it becomes the St. Lawrence again, basically on the outflow. So yeah,
I've
apparently
been to.
Sorry,
I've been to Quebec and seen that shift in the tides in the river. As the tide shift, it's really dramatic as the river's trying to come out into the ocean and the ocean's trying to come into the river, and the whole thing is like this huge roiling thing. It's really dramatic and beautiful.
You have to watch the river and the ocean arm wrestle. But yeah, apparently
twice a day.
This was hunted. It was hunted and fished way back while it was still the Champlain Sea by native people. Apparently, they used the islands, archaeologists think, for fish processing. So you'd gut your fish and dry them or whatever, or smoke them, whatever you're going to do, and then take them to the inland villages. Some of the islands were also used for burial mounds. There was also trade in copper, jasper, flints, and quartzite around there. By the time Europeans got there, who bothered to write things down, it was inhabited by the Iroquoians. The St. Lawrence Iroquoians, that's what they're called, except for there was this whole history of conflict before that where the Iroquoians had invaded from the Ohio River Valley, and when the Algonquinians were already there, and something happened with a giant lake serpent rising from Ontario and a blazing star, which probably the blazing star was a comet, which actually did obliterate a large Native American village. So I would have liked to go into that. Apologies if I'm using European names for things, and it's probably a lot more complicated than that. And as Joe's probably about to tell you, it's pretty ecologically important because, the river connects things. It connects the oceans to the various other rivers and lakes, just going for a very long way and, draining a very, very large amounts of space. But invasive species are always trying to come up there. And apparently, I saw this movie that, whales are getting cancer in the Atlantic Ocean because of heavy metals being dumped up all the way in the furthest Great Lakes. You got to be careful with something that connects that many things with water. Well, things spread quickly in water. We know this.
All right.
Also,
thanks
giant
a lot, Rebecca.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And I could tell you that now the islands in the St. Lawrence near Quebec City there are inhabited by vineyards and cheese shops and tourist bakeries. those are the big things on those islands now. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Rebecca, and
you're welcome.
We'll hear from you next week.
A lot of times I just learned that there's a lot more going on than I had realized with things.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks. So I guess you'll have to hang up so that if someone wants to call in at 877-909-1007, they can. But it's been a pleasure. Now, on to ecological news, and we got a whole bunch to cover. A lot's been happening ecologically. First of all, the story that we seem to be the only ones following, and that is the Mauna Loa CO2 measurements in Hawaii that measure the amount of CO2 in the air. And I am very happy to report that the July figures are in, and I have to say that we are doing pretty well compared. It looks like, and I have the graph up on my screen, the rate of increase seems to be declining. I mean, I can compare the rate of increase from July 2021 to July 20, and then the rate from July 20 to to July 2019. And we have definitely had a smaller increase. In fact, it looks like the increase is only about half this year of what it was in 2019. And so, it's still an increase. So don't get complacent. It's not like, oh, we've done it. No, but we might be flattening the curve finally, as they say. So many wind turbines and solar panels have come online. So many coal plants have shut down. It's actually starting to get reflected in the numbers. So some really good news there that I wanted to start off our news segment with. Let's see. Also, we have going to KTAR, a radio station in Tucson, Arizona, has reported 92.3 FM in Tucson, Arizona. The Center for Biological Diversity and congressman sued Trump administration when they put up the wall because they said you didn't do any kind of environmental impact statement. And as we've talked about before, having this wall has a tremendous environmental impact. It upsets hunting territories. It blocks migrations for birds and animals. It does all kinds of terrible things to the environment. And so they sued. Back in 2017, they brought this lawsuit, and here we are 4 years later. The judge decided in their favor, in the Center for Biological Diversity's favor, said, yes, you were right. They broke the law. They should have done an environmental impact statement, and they didn't. And but unfortunately, the judge did not put any kind of correction. No fines, no penalties, no take down these sections, no, open this part up during migration season. None of that. They just said, yep, you were right, environmentalists. And this is a part of a disturbing trend, and it's happening more and more often that the rulings, the courts will say, yes, you're absolutely right, this company or this government agency broke the law, but then they don't do anything about it. They don't try to fix the law that gets broken. And they're essentially, what they're doing is they're starting to treat environmental laws as second-class laws. Not like financial laws or labor laws, not like laws that you need to enforce. They're trying to turn ecological law into more like guidelines, as they say, with no penalties for breaking them. And this is terrible. This is cannot be allowed to continue, because if you are allowed to define ecological law as a second-class law that doesn't need to be enforced, you've essentially undermined our whole society, both in terms of law and in terms of maintaining the society, maintaining enough of an ecological balance that we can keep the society going. So, cheers to the judge for deciding correctly in favor of the Center for Biological Diversity, but massive boos to the judge for not then issuing any sort of correction to the problem. And we, of course, saw that also happened with DAPL about a year ago. So, again, judge says, yep, they broke the law. And in that case, the first federal judge actually did have an injunction, said, okay, you got to shut the pipeline down. But then the next level up, the Court of Appeals, reversed his decision and said, oh, no, you can keep going. So it's not good. Another thing that's not good is the Line 3 controversy in Minnesota. And we are up over 800 arrested. In fact, 23 more got arrested on September 10th. So we're closing in on 900 arrests in that action. And in fact, on September 9th, there were 7 people arrested. And they used, the way the protesters are trying to stop the pipeline is to lock themselves in front of the equipment and the gates so that the machinery can't go through to destroy the land. And I saw the GNU Collective has a little video. They had a new device. It's called the Helix Spiral, which is this amazing construction of metal rods and cables that somehow holds itself up. And the protesters were up 30 feet in the air on top of this thing. And it took the police about 7 hours to try to get them out of there. But there have already been 28 spills on the Line 3 pipeline, and the squad has shown up. The Democrats, the ultra liberal Democrats in Congress, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Ayanna Pressley, and Cori Bush showed up to show their support for stopping the pipeline, to show their support for the protesters. But typically what happens with the Democrats is once those folks show up, nothing happens. They don't actually do anything, but those are the people they dispatch to say the right things and to be in the right place. But it's up to Biden. It's a Democrat in office. That Deb Haaland is a Democrat running the Interior Department, and the tribe that lives in the area that the pipeline is going through has now filed in federal court because a Minnesota judge is the one who said that the pipeline can go right through the tribal lands, but it's a federal treaty that says the tribes should get to decide for themselves if they want this pipeline to come through or not. And so let's hope that one works. And it's interesting to contrast the Line 3 attitude towards the tribal governments, where Line 3, the tribal governments are united in opposition to Line 3. But at Fairy Creek, you have a couple of the tribal governments that have made a deal. So we're going now to British Columbia and Fairy Creek, where they're trying to stop the logging of old-growth forest. There, a couple of the tribal governments made a deal with the federal government. They got $200,000 to allow $200 million worth of timber to get taken off their lands. And there, the NDP, the New Democratic Party, are saying, "Oh, we can't stop the destruction of the old growth. This tribal government agreed to it," and that is absolutely wrong. A, and B, it's just interesting in the U.S. at Line 3, the tribal governments oppose it, and the government says, "Sorry, we're pushing through anyway." In Fairy Creek, they're saying the tribal governments support it, but we're not going to stop them. So it's like when the tribal government's doing what the industries want, then they get paid attention to and get put out front. And I just wanted to say, I worked for the Seneca Nation of Indians for a while, and on the reservation, they have a word, they have a name that they call people who do these sorts of things, sell $200 million of timber for $200,000. They call them sellouts. And this is part of what they call colonialism, because you always get a group or a chief or, some portion of the native population that you're wiping out. You get them to get out front and be the ones that are your spokesman and do your bidding. And so a lot of people in British Columbia aren't going along with this, but that's what the NDP is holding out as their shield against their criticism for allowing the destruction of the last of the old growth in the area. And that battle is still raging. The mainstream Canadian press has picked it up again because they passed the record for a number of arrests in a civil disobedience action. There, right now, the latest number I saw was 882 people have been arrested protesting Fairy Creek. And an interesting new development, the way it works is the police go in and break up the protesters, beat them or do whatever they have to do, spray tear gas in their eyes to get them off the road so that the logging trucks can come through and the logging equipment come through. And so what they've started doing, the police will clear the people out, and the people will have cars lined up on the side of the road where they had to drive to the site of the protest. Now the logging company is smashing those cars. Once they in fact, there's videos on the internet of backhoes and front end loaders literally just smashing cars to pieces, and police watching and basically cheering them on, saying, "Yeah, go for it." And it's just another example of just how criminal this has become. the police are already in violation of the injunction that allows them to arrest the protesters, in that they are keeping the press away, they're creating exclusion zones, and the judge has specifically ruled that those activities are against the law. They violate the Canadian Constitution, but that hasn't stopped the Royal Canadian Mounted Police from doing them. They still do all these things, and this whole thing is coming to a head very soon, because the whole injunction that the judge granted that allows the police to go in and beat people up, although he would say my injunction doesn't allow people to get beaten up, and I think he actually said that, but that injunction expires on September 26th. And so Teal Jones, the timber company that's benefiting from doing all this destruction of old growth, is applying for an extension of this injunction. But now the point is, the important thing here is that the judge who issued the injunction has since ruled that the police are violating the Canadian Constitution by enforcing this injunction. And so now the question is, do the Canadian courts respect the rule of law? Because one thing you're supposed to take into account in legal matters is, when you're deciding how to treat somebody who breaks the law, is, do they keep doing it? Is it a repeat? Is it a pattern? And what happens when they do it? And so that's the whole idea behind, if people keep breaking the law, they get more and more severe penalties. So now we have the Royal Canadian Mounted Police that are breaking the law, and now we have Teal Jones, because it's not legal to smash people's cars to pieces. They've got them breaking the law, and so now is the court gonna? And the court has said they're breaking the law. So is the court going to grant them an extension of this injunction, even though they're enforcing it illegally? And that's a question, and that again, that ties back into the question of sellout. I mean, someone who will sell out the law in order to appease these corporations and these politicians, because the new Democratic Party that currently is running British Columbia doesn't want this to keep going, doesn't want this to get reported on, doesn't want this controversy to continue, because it makes them look bad. They're not thinking in terms of the ecological damage of allowing the last of the old growth to get destroyed. And all they did was this deferral of one little part of the sale at Fairy Creek, and a deferral just means we're saving this bit for last. It's a 2-year deferral. The parcels that they're cutting now, that they have permission to cut, it's going to take them about 2 years to get through all of it. And so they just said, we'll save this little bit that the protesters are at. We'll wait, and we'll do that bit last. But they have broken through the protester blockades at several points, and they've taken down some incredibly large, incredibly old trees the past week, some over 1,000 years old. And so the blockades are still holding in many places, and they're still slowing the destruction, but they're one by one they're losing some of these largest trees. And the problem, of course, with there is that once they're gone for good. But we're going to stick around for as long as we can, and I just wanted to thank everyone for staying with us. Don't worry, sports is mere minutes away, and you'll have sports here on 100.7, the ticket for the rest of the day. But I want to thank you all for listening. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you folks, and hope you continue to listen to us, and we're going to try to keep bringing you the most important environmental news we can find. So that's it for this week. This is Joe DeMare signing off.
Give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting